Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran and today I'm joined by Owen Brown, who's a journalist and an expert in youth football. Today on the podcast we are asking, what are the best nations doing in terms of youth development? How are Scotland doing compared to them? And which youth players should we be most excited about? Now, I've had some lovely comments regarding episode 1, so thank you very much for listening and for commenting if you were one of them. Please do continue to like and share and subscribe. This is obviously the second episode, so again, we're trying to get it off the ground, so everything you can do to spread the word, even if it is just by listening, it's hugely appreciated. But anyway, enough of me. We've got a great episode for you. Let's jump into it. Okay, everyone, I am delighted to welcome to the podcast Owen Brown. Owen, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks, Kieran. How are you?
I'm good. I'm even better because it is the day following Scotland beating Norway in the last couple of minutes. So yeah, I'm extra good today. I mean, there's obviously lots of things that we want to touch on today, but I think we should give a little bit of time to just reveling in that result. What did you think of that finish?
It's incredible, isn't it? I think I read somewhere that was the first time that Scotland have turned around a match in the final 10 minutes to come from behind since the 19th century at a cricket ground against England. So, it's a pretty rare, unique experience to see Scotland do something like that. But not a total shock to see team spirit and resilience like that under Steve Clarke. So I'm really happy. It was great result.
Yeah. Oh my word. Yeah, I did a lot of running and shouting, much to the bemusement of my 2-year-old, who couldn't quite understand what on earth his dad was doing. But oh man, what a finish! Just reminds us how good it is to be Scottish and to follow football. Because just the highs and lows that it gives you, it's incredible. It's all worth it for moments like that. When McLean scored that goal, honestly, I couldn't believe it. What a goal as well! Like that second goal was beautiful.
Yeah, lovely finish. Yep.
So you're a bit of an expert on the kind of the younger ages. Should we say? Can you just give us a little bit of a background to yourself? Just tell us a little bit about your kind of connection to football.
Yeah, of course, Kieran. So I'm Owen Brown. Over the last 5 years, my connection to Scottish football has been as a journalist. I've been editor and podcaster for Pure Football and a writer for outlets including Stats Bomb, Scouted Football and The Athletic. My focus has been pretty broad, thinking, talking and writing about tactics, player analysis, statistics, recruitment and fan culture. Over the last couple of years, I've developed a bit of an interest in elite level youth football. And initially that was a wide global interest. So you'd find me watching like the under-17 African Cup of Nations, for instance. But more recently, it's narrowed to a focus on Scotland and specifically the Scotland national team from the under-16 level up to under-21 age group, and also top level youth club football, either within Scotland or involving Scottish players. I set up the Young Team, which was an online newsletter to analyse Scotland youth national team matches and players. I was co-commentator for a Scotland under-21 match live stream. I've pitched the BBC about Scotland's 1982 little-known under-18 European Championship victory, which became a documentary through which the squad were reunited 40 years later. And I've also kind of built a network of players, parents of players, people who work at clubs, football agents and journalists. I think many of them kind of view me as a good source of advice. I think I've been able to build up some knowledge, which means I'm pretty happy to share my thoughts with you, Kieran, and the audience on the topic of improving Scottish football in terms of the elite youth game.
Brilliant. Well, it would just be great to get a little bit of context into the kind of what's happening globally, in terms of elite youth development. So can you just give us a bit of context as to where we are?
Sure, Kieran. I think the context is important because we're not alone, of course, in thinking about how we can improve as a footballing nation, and specifically how we can improve at elite youth development. And again, even more specifically, how we deal with that sort of period between youth football and senior first team football. So there's a lot happening around the world. And what I would say, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody listening, given we're on a podcast about how we improve things, I'm encouraged by innovation. And it's encouraging to me that it seems as though the SFA is attempting to learn from other innovators. I think you need to be cautious around these things when you kind of look globally, because it can be difficult to tell what's true innovation and what's a fad. And also in terms of youth development, it can be problematic, I think, if you decide that some other nation's work is just something to lift and copy wholesale, for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, you'd be left behind if you just did that, because results, obviously, when you're developing young people, take a while to come to fruition. It's a long tail, and football changes pretty rapidly. But with that being said, and you know, us kind of being aware of that, might be fun just to look through a couple of examples of what's happening in various countries globally. So
yes, please. Yeah.
Let's start not too far away from home. So let's go down to England. Key kind of development there very recently is that a few days ago they changed the criteria in England for clubs for signing overseas players. They've eased them basically. So pre-Brexit and then post-Brexit, there's been several kind of changes, but basically they introduced a points-based system, and signings had to qualify for a permit, you know, what's called a governing body endorsement, or play for clubs. But the powers that be there in football have now determined that teams in the Premier League and the Championship will be able to add 4 players who don't qualify for a GBE to their squads, and teams in League One and League Two will be allowed to. However, they'll lose their opportunity to do that in future seasons if they don't give a significant amount of minutes to their English youngsters. So that's a kind of development where it might have an impact in terms of how much English youth gets played. It could have an impact on how much clubs from England will be wanting to buy players from Scotland, because they can probably widen their scope again and go for players from other nations who might not have previously qualified for a permit. In addition to that, there's been a season-long review of the under-21 competition in England, because of concerns about how effective their programme is in preparing academy players for the senior game. So again, we're not alone in you know, our kind of concerns about that. There's been a lot of new formats suggested for next season's campaign and beyond, but academy managers are going to choose which one will be put forward to the Premier League's AGM in June. The kind of rumours at the moment is that they're going to go for a Swiss model, which is kind of similar to what will be used in the Champions League from 2024-2025, which is basically a single league of 25 teams, which removes relegation. And they think, or some of them think, that development decisions have not been a priority, because people have been too focused on promotion and relegation and league position and so on. So they think that might change. As well as that, in England, I just wanted to mention that we've seen other kind of innovations or developments, such as some clubs have signed a recently retired coach or senior player to play for their under-23s. So to have that player, you know, kind of setting standards within the team and stuff like that. So that's England. Out with England, there's more complexity, you know, in terms of intentions and what works at play, I think, in Belgium. So Belgium have a very kind of influential child development coaching revolution, where they've made things very player focused. So lots of small-sided games, lots of like basically 1v1 games with a goalkeeper, and lots of things where they have multiple sports or activities to improve motor skills generally. Lots of game-based situations where they try and encourage players to make decisions for themselves. And that all sounds great. And, you know, obviously there's loads of positives to that, but we need to be careful, I think, when we look at these innovations and think that those will make us successful too, because there's lots and lots of factors at play. When you drill into the detail of the successful Belgian national team recently, there's other factors apart from the coaching revolution. So they changed their immigration and citizenship rules in the 1980s, and that brought a lot more diversity to their team. There were genetic factors. Lots of players in their kind of so-called golden generation happened to have parents who were also professional athletes. Another one I just wanted to mention in terms of coaching approach is Uruguay. So Uruguay are obviously an interesting nation, given they've long outperformed what might be expected based on population size in terms of producing talented footballers. And they won the Under-20 World Cup just a couple of weeks ago, this year's version of it. So it's really worthwhile, I think, looking at what a country like that is doing. They benefited from a FIFA development program, which was set up in 2016, which gave them lots of administrative, technical and financial support through FIFA. And they drew up a strategic plan, and Oscar Tabarez, their legendary former manager, was involved in the design and implementation of that. One of the standout elements that I quite like, is maybe interesting, is that every single week in Uruguay, from Monday to Wednesday, the top 30 clubs in the country release their best under 15 players to a national team training camp. So the national team has all of those players for 2 days a week, 3 days a week, the whole year, every week. What do you think about that? Do you think that might be a good one for us?
Oh, that sounds exciting. I've never heard of anything like that before.
Yeah, very difficult, I think, to get clubs to go for that. It must have been incentivized by, the FIFA funding and stuff like that. But the Republic of Korea is another kind of interesting nation to look at. So they hosted that tournament in 2017. They got to the final in 2019. There wasn't a tournament in 2021 because of COVID, but they got to the semi-final in this year's competition. So they've had lots of success at that age. And they, a couple of years ago, signed memorandums of understanding with the Belgian Football Association, with the Croatian Football Association and Bayern Munich, to support them with team management and youth development systems. They are heavily invested in grassroots youth football. They've recently started building a new national football centre, which is being done by the same architectural firm who did the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam, and is massive, 450,000 square meters, 2 stadiums, one indoor, one outdoor, multiple pitches, sports science. It's going to be integrated with the landscape, but we'll also have tech features, smart tracking built into it and stuff. They basically want, to make Korea a global football destination and cultivate that next generation of stars for the country. And a kind of final country to consider is Croatia. There was a SFA coaching podcast which had a Croatian football expert on it who talked about the quality of their coaches being the big factor for him. He said that they're all paid, not volunteers. They all have UEFA licenses, and they have a big focus on training young players to not be automatons, to basically have a tactical understanding and that kind of decision-making under pressure ability, which is really, kind of key for them. And they also talked about the importance of hooking into a nation's passion for the sport, which I think is something we can kind of aspire to here as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of really exciting ideas going on around the world. Some of which you've listed out there. My main concern, really, just from a Scottish perspective, is are the powers that be, are they actually actively looking at the likes of Uruguay? Sometimes in Scotland it can be a bit old school in the way we operate. This is how we've always done it. Do you get the sense that actually there are people out there trying to actively take ideas and and bring them into the Scottish fold?
I think there's definitely good intention to, but whether or not there's the resources to really go to the extent of drilling into what did Uruguay do and what could we do, is hard to say. We want to try and find kind of meaning in the success of others and things that we can borrow, but we just need to keep kind of moving, keep trying to innovate. Youth development projects have a long tail, and if we just copy what somebody's doing, we'll be 15 years behind what's led to success, and we might not even know the circumstances and things that actually made it work.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so give us a little bit of an overview then about the key factors at play within Scotland itself then.
Sure. It feels to me like there's a lot going on right now. It's a sort of intense moment in terms of youth players and the public consciousness in Scotland. I guess that's from the impact of COVID-19 financially and developmentally for players, the consequences of Brexit, the creation of the B teams by Celtic, Rangers and Hearts. There's been media articles about the lack of game time at the top level within Scotland for young Scottish players. And I think the first thing we should maybe do when we talk about the current key factors is just to kind of acknowledge that as much as you and I are kind of saying that there should be more done to improve things, that there have been efforts made to try and improve Scottish football over a long period of time, and there's some historical context and developments that we should maybe kind of run through. So Henry McLeish, politician and former footballer, put out a review into the game in the early 2010s, calling for large-scale change and improvements. And we've seen kind of as a result of that, the introduction of a couple of things. So we've had the SFA performance schools and the creation of the Oriam Centre as sort of tangible outcomes over the last decade. The SFA themselves have also had 2 5-year plans. So their current one is called The Power of Football, and it covers the years 2021 to 2025. It's well worth having a look at that to see what the kind of strategy around that is. But in terms of the performance schools and their impact on elite youth development in Scotland, the issue with kind of assessing things is that it takes a long time to tell if efforts like these are successful or not. And also, a lot of the feedback that you're going to get on them will be anecdotal, I guess, or potentially there's success stories that are kind of applied after the fact. So one of the aspirations of the SFA's 5-year plan prior to this one was to have a performance school graduate play at the Euros for Scotland, and that happened. Billy Gilmore went to performance school. He played at Euros, but does that mean therefore that performance schools are good? Well, that's a question, and we can't really know the answer to that for generations. They feel like a good development, broadly speaking, to me, but it's just something to consider. But anyway, I just mentioned those to say that they are a big factor, I think, in terms of current Scottish elite youth football development. Another factor is Oriam. So Oriam is the centre at Edinburgh. It's a sports facility, basically. It's been a little bit of a troubled development lately due to the Scotland senior team not wanting to use it as a base. My view is that it's a little bit of a problem that Oriam is kind of not being used perhaps in the way it should be. It was funded in part by the taxpayer. So I think even for that level, the fact that this came out of McLeish's report and there was money invested in it, there maybe needs to be a compromise, and it should be embraced fully by the youth levels of the Scottish national team. So that's just a kind of other key factor in that. And another kind of thing that I think is a big factor is that McLeish in his report, he basically wanted the SFA to have more power over the game. And it feels to me, at least in terms of their ability to influence youth development, it's declined even more. I don't think, as far as I know, that the SFA have replaced the performance director role, at least not with a direct like-for-like role since Malky Mackay left. And if you look at the SFA's operational board meetings, there's a lack, in my view, of a high-level football person who represents the national team interests, let alone the youth side of the national team or youth development. If you look at the one they've got a couple of board meetings that they have, operational ones, but the professional game board is dominated by the SPFL and other league interests. In my view, that's a factor again. There needs to be some sort of SFA performance director in those meetings, or somebody advocating for how do we improve the national team, the national youth team, young players. So those are kind of some factors. Another big factor, something you asked me before on, Kieran, is how do we retain young players rather than going to England? We're going to come on, I think, later in the podcast, maybe to some specific changes I'd like Scottish football to consider when it kind of comes to elite youth development and bridging that gap that we talked. But we should acknowledge the kind of talent drain as one of the factors at play. My view briefly on that is that you really need to assess all these decisions and choices on an individual basis. The individual player's choice and what options they have are kind of key. But based on chats I've had with people at clubs in England over the last year or two, it sometimes saddens me because of a lack of good knowledge amongst them about the specific players that they're targeting in terms of their profile, their level, and so on. And the view, I think, that a lot of these clubs have of our players as being a cheap gamble, particularly at the time when they were forced into markets like us because of Brexit. So generally speaking, I'm delighted when I see one of our starlets go somewhere where they'll get the best development possible. But I'm a little bit sceptical at times about the view of them and the intentions of some of the clubs and the people recruiting them. But that's what my main concern is always for the players. I hope that they're always well advised and go to the right place for them and fulfill their potential. What about you on that? Given it was something you'd asked me before, what was your kind of thoughts on the talent drain and going to?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a bit worrying to to hear it described as a cheap gamble. Like I said in an earlier episode, I think it is the system that is in place in England. The academy, structures that they've got, and the amount of time that they give. Especially, I guess, at the bigger clubs, the amount of time they give to individual players, to really tailor their development, I think is something that we're unable to match at the moment in Scotland. So really, I mean, what I would love to see is obviously Scotland, and the clubs in Scotland just finding a way to somehow get to that same sort of level where we are able to individually tailor a system, for each player to really bring them on, and not just as a footballer, but also as a person. So, yeah, that's kind of where I am. But
Sure.
I'm also delighted to be seeing, some of our best talent, beginning to make breakthroughs in the English Premier League, because, like it or not, that is, the best league in the world, and to see some of our young talent beginning to play pretty regularly is great for the national side, certainly.
Yeah, that's where the complexity in all this lies, I think, because you kind of, as a fan of Scottish football, as a watcher, as a you kind of want the league to be good. You want kind of lots of young players to be staying in Scotland and performing and getting chances here, but also I think it's understandable and should be encouraged for players to go where the best opportunities are for them. So it's a difficult one, and I guess one of the ways in which a couple of the clubs in Scotland have thought that they could try and address that gap and keep some of those players is a final big factor we should talk about in terms of the current state of play in Scotland, which is B teams.
Yes, please. Hot topic of the day.
Even hotter this week, I guess, because there's been significant news that Rangers have stated that they'll not be participating in the Lowland League this coming season. So their B team, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we assume they're going to go on some sort of tour, play invitational cups, friendlies against other elite teams. So that's a kind of pretty remarkable development that happened in the wake of this aborted vote to see if they could set up the Conference League at a higher level. And I think that kind of decision and that vote and the kind of public kind of response to it is an interesting element to this. I think that the strategy behind the setup of the B teams has been poor in terms of how it's caused perception to come of them. The perception of them has been very badly damaged. I think that fans of other clubs out of the three that have started them feel that it's been a kind of top-down imposed change designed just to benefit the big clubs. And also the other difficulty for the clubs themselves is that I think they're finding probably that agents and players are not satisfied with the level of football that they're in terms of the Lowland League. So overall, kind of from all sides, perception of it has been very damaged. It'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward from this. Again, as it is with pretty much all of this, my main concern is for the players. I have to say that personally, I think not exactly in the way that these have been set up, but generally speaking, there can be some benefits to B teams. And whether we use that word or not, I mean, B team's just a marketing phrase, right? But whatever we choose to call a team that exists to bridge that gap between 18-year-old and first team football, there's obviously some benefits to having a system, a strategy for how you manage your players at that point. But with the way it's been done, I was initially very concerned that this was going to just be for the benefit of the clubs, and it kind of mirrors what maybe fans of other clubs have felt, that this is just for the benefit of Rangers and Celtic as opposed to the benefit of the wider game in Scotland. But also, more specifically, I felt that the way it was being done was not for the benefit of the Rangers and Celtic players, but for the benefit of the club. I could tell that there were going to be aspirations for them to get into a higher level in the SPFL system at some point, and that in order to do that, it was probably going to lead to the mismanagement of individual player development and the careers of specific players. So I'm talking about players having to spend more time in a B team at that level than they should have to.
I'm just going to interject and just double check. Owen, do you have the solution by any chance to this whole B team situation? Because I haven't seen one amazing kind of solution. Is there anything that you think could actually work really well?
Well, let's talk about some specific improvements, right, to consider in Scottish football. I think that there's no way I'm going to say, hey, I've got the magic answer, the kind of silver bullet. I think if anybody says that, let's talk generally in youth football, youth development. If anybody says that they have the one answer to everything, I'm incredibly skeptical about that. I think I'm always there for innovation, but you need to be careful. You need to rigorously assess the potential side effects of anything, because well-intentioned ideas can have unexpected negative consequences. But in terms of some things I would like to see Scottish football consider, the first one is around player pathways. I would like to have development as an obligation at clubs. What I mean by that is I would like there to be contractual development plans. So my feeling, based on conversations with various people, parents of players, clubs, and so on, is that player development at clubs is very ad hoc. I don't think fans would really even realise quite how on the hoof and improvisational and non-strategic it is at times. It can be impacted by factors out with the player's control. Injuries to other players can be a benefit. You might get some game time as a result of it, but also that might be a negative, because even if you get game time as a result of it, it might kind of take you out of what the plan was. You can be affected by a change of manager. Anyway, the point is that these things have a lack of strategy around them and a lack of consequences for the clubs when there isn't a strategy or isn't a kind of pathway or development plan. So I'd like there to be regulation, SFA and SPFL regulation, that as part of a player contract, you need to have a development plan with specific steps over specific periods of time. And I'd like there to be penalties. So I'd like there to be potential breach of contract where the player can, walk if things are not met. Potentially the loss of a development fee. So, one thing that happens in football in Scotland is that if a player is at your club for a period of time, if they leave at the end of the contract, you're due a fee for developing them. Maybe that should go if you've not developed them in the way that the contract states that it should. The development fee is something that's kind of interesting and needs to be assessed a little bit in my view anyway, because it's well intentioned, right? Clubs should obviously be compensated in some way for the time that they invest into players, but it makes it difficult because it means that if the player does want to leave at the end of their contract, we talked earlier about this talent drain from Scotland. Very, very few clubs in Scotland can afford to pay a development fee for a player, a young player, even if they wanted to keep them in our game. So that's a lot of things. But anyway, yeah, I would try and have that development as an obligation, and I would extend that in terms of development plan to the clubs having to have an approach to game time, and that would mean, for example, having smarter loans. So the loan market in Scotland is very inefficient in my view, and a difficult experience for young players. So often young players are sent to clubs that aren't suitable for them, whether that's that they don't fit the style of play, or whether there's a hierarchy of players already in place, and they're not going to get on the pitch, or whether they're just a part-time club and therefore the player's going to be training at their parent club anyway, so they're not getting a real kind of experience of being at another club. So it's one of the things that I would try and make as a contractual factor, to smarten those things up. So that's number one in terms of improvement I would consider. Any thoughts on that, Kieran? Do you
Nope.
throwing that one out, or are we okay with it as a...
I was just going to say, I love it. I absolutely love it. Yeah, development as an obligation. And it's crazy to think that we don't have that already in place.
Yeah.
That, you can literally... these are people's lives,
Absolutely.
not just their careers. We really do have to do everything we can and put a value on it, and absolutely hold clubs to account as well. So, absolutely bang up for that. Number two, if you will, please, Owen.
Yeah, next thing I would really like to have is a more innovative Premiership generally. So I think that we need to find a way within Scotland to allow managers more time, to have more accountability on decision makers at clubs, but to do that in a way that encourages more out of the box thinking, people doing things a little bit differently. And I think that could have a really good knock-on effect in terms of youth development. As an example, in Denmark, there were two fairly traditional powerhouses in FC Copenhagen and Brøndby, but that's been disrupted over the last decade by Nordsjælland with their focus on youth, and Midtjylland with their focus on data analytics. It's tough, obviously, particularly in the Premiership, the disparity between Celtic and Rangers and the rest financially is clear, stark, but I think that would be a thing that if we can find a way to encourage it, it will... one of the ways that we'll see fruit is in terms of our young players.
Yep, absolutely. There's a definite need for some of our clubs to start thinking outside the box and using the likes of Denmark. Some of the clubs that throughout Scandinavia, to be honest, there does seem to be a lot of kind of innovative new thinking going on. So it'd be great to see some of our clubs just trying something a little bit different, because it can be a bit same old at times.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of other specific improvement that I would like us to consider is around B teams. So I was kind of thinking about this. You could have a quota in terms of trying to force teams to give X amount of minutes to players of a certain age and things like that. But let's just go for a bit of a B team restructure. So what I would do is try and have more of a strategic approach to introducing B teams and make it less of a just Rangers and Celtic or big teams thing. Now, this is really difficult because basically the teams don't have the money for it. We have to find a way for the teams to get more money to be able to do it. But if we can, I would like us to have maybe a restructure and you may have, I don't know, another podcast which looks more extensively at league restructure in Scotland, but something which allows more teams to have B teams. I'm talking like, as an example, if you look at the under-18 level in Scotland at the moment, which is Club Academy Scotland, you could take a bunch of the teams that are within that. So as an elite level, which has like Aberdeen, Celtic, Dundee United, Hamilton Accies, Hearts, Hibs, Killie, Motherwell, Queen's Park, Rangers and St Mirren. You could have those. You could have the ones at the next level, and basically come up with, let's say, 20 teams, and create some sort of system. Considering, of course, the teams within the structure before, which had been very annoyed as to how they've been treated, the ones below the Lowland League and the Highland Leagues, but some form of reconstruction where we incentivise things for as many parties as possible, and have a properly set up, well thought out system of B leagues, B teams rather, teams of people who are on the cusp of maybe going to senior football. That would be another kind of aspect that I think could improve things. And maybe not call it B teams as well, just given the marketing of that.
Yeah, it does need a bit of a rebrand now, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so those are kind of like three big things that you would, ideally, like to see, that improvements that we should certainly be open to considering, right?
Yeah, but just wanted to say with the last one, needs to be at a level that's appropriate for it, and also I'd be open to the innovatory ideas that we've maybe seen in England. We talked at the top of the podcast about senior players within them, things like that. All sorts of innovation would be welcome. I'm not saying that would just be done the same way that Rangers, Celtic, and Hearts are doing at the moment, but something in that gap could definitely be good.
Excellent. Good. Well, Owen, I think we're getting towards the end of the podcast. We could, I'm sure, go on for quite a lot longer on all these different topics, but I wanted to finish on just a little bit of positivity, specifically regarding kind of the youth teams in within the Scotland setup, because things are probably in a better place than they've been for a long time. Obviously, we're fairly familiar, most of us, with the Scotland under-21s. But what about like even the lower ages? The 16s, the 17s. Are you seeing some really good talent being developed? What's the current state of affairs there?
Sure. Well, I guess one standout thing is that the under-17s went to back-to-back Euros. That's a really good achievement. And those happen yearly, so once every year. So quite interestingly, quite a lot of the group that had been at the one this year had played at the one previous. So we had quite a young team at the 2022 Euros with, I think it was 6 players at that, and this year's iteration. So that's a real positive. And I would say that they're trying to play good football. They're being coached to play out from the back. They're trying to take decisions under pressure and so on. So that's a positive for me. I think that we're seeing some players playing at a very high level. So we talked before about people going to English academies. You've got a clutch of players: Ben Doak, Rory Wilson, mebude, Josh Adam, all playing for really, really, really elite clubs in England. So that's a positive element for them.
Yeah, and you named some players there who are really showing some great promise. And yeah, I'm also quite excited about it as well. Are there any other names you'd like to throw out at us? People that we should be keeping an eye on, either under 21s or even younger than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got loads of favourites, but I guess Lennon Miller, 2006 born player at Motherwell, central midfielder. I really like him. He made his debut in the league for their senior team this season, and he was at both of those Euros with the under-17s that I mentioned. He's really good. I think that Matthew Anderson, for Scotland under-21s, I think despite the fact that it's Scotland under-21s, maybe a lot of people apart from Celtic fans won't have seen him. He's a left back, and I remember speaking to an analyst at Celtic who went on to Leicester with Brendan Rodgers a while ago, and he pointed out Matthew Anderson as being one of the best prospects in their academy for some time. I think we've got a recent tradition of having really good fullbacks.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's great. We've got another left back.
You can never have enough good players as far as I'm concerned, so bring them all on. But anyway, he played for Scotland under 21s today against Norway, and that's really pleasing to see because I think he's a really, really good player. And who else? Another one that's gone to England that hasn't been mentioned a lot maybe is Charlie MacArthur, who's gone to Newcastle United. He was at Kilmarnock. He's a left-footed centre-back, very, very good in my view, in that he kind of blends the so-called modern, passing ability and stuff with a bit of the traditional physical elements. So one that I've got high hopes for.
Nice. And then there's also a couple of guys as well who are playing quite regularly for championship sides, but are also part of our under 21s setup, which is quite unusual. I can't remember the last time we would have that because, that I think just shows the strength in depth that the Scotland men's team have, that guys who are playing regular championship football, 10, 15 years ago, they would be straight into our men's team. But now, they're under 21s. I'm specifically thinking about Tommy Conway, who scored today, Hayden, Hackney as well. Both of those guys seem to be, really good prospects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. They're both excellent talents. I think that's partly down to Steve Clarke in that he's made it more of a club feel at the national team level, in that you're not going to get caps handed out all over the place these days. It's quite a tight squad, which I think has its benefits. So it's going to take a little bit more for these players to break through. But the one thing I would say about that, just in terms of people breaking through to the next level, is a really encouraging thing for me at the moment in terms of the Scottish national team youth levels, is that they are skipping players up levels. So Ben Doak, for example, being in the under-21s when he's so young. Rory Wilson's been at that level too. So there is this kind of, a deliberate strategy, I think, to escalate people rather than kind of maintaining them within a level if they think they're of the level to skip up some age groups, which is nice to see.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Right, final question before I let you go. Something I ask every guest. If you had a magic wand, Owen, and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be?
More money. So it's a bit of a cop-out answer, I guess, maybe given its lack of specificity, but it's the answer to everything, really, in terms of improving stuff. So yeah, we need more money. We could go to try and get some funds from these FIFA development things that they've set up. I mean, for example, and I appreciate that part of the point of these funds at FIFA is to help more developing nations, or perhaps countries that haven't had support in the past. So they put a lot of money into Morocco, for example, a few years ago, and that's really borne fruit for Morocco, as we saw at the World Cup. They've had massive change in their infrastructure and facilities, but we need to go and get some of that if we can, from FIFA or UEFA, or the government needs to tax certain companies who have a detrimental impact on our health in order to fund our health. But yeah, I want more money for the game. I want more money invested in youth development.
Yep, love it. Yep, always up for more money. Is it just? I mean, do the powers that be just need to apply for that kind of fund? How does it actually work in practical terms? Do you know?
In terms of the FIFA stuff, I guess you need to apply, and as I said, it's likely to be very low on the list. So you're looking at more things like taxation to get that kind of money, which is difficult, right? There's not the political will to go to people and say, let's give money to football. People then just think of Erling Haaland on 350 grand a week or whatever. So it's a difficult one to get money for, but we need to try and get it and pose it as a question of national health and community investment and things like that, and build up these grassroots facilities. Again, the one to look at for me is the Republic of Ireland. Very recently, like last month, basically, they had a huge package of investment announced to improve the infrastructure and facilities, the stadia and so on, right across the country. We could try and do similar.
Yeah, that looks really good, and that is going to bear fruit. I mean, the amount of money that they're putting in and their aims and ambitions, you're really clearly marked out, which is, really impressive from them. Is that mainly government funding that's kind of going into that? I'm assuming it's not got any FIFA development funding.
I think they got money from FIFA and UEFA as well as the government. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, anyone listening from the powers that be at Scotland, let's look at what they're doing, what Ireland is doing, and let's do something even better. Good. All right, Owen, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Like I say, we could have gone into a lot more detail on all those things, but we will do that again in a future podcast if you're up for coming back at some point.
Of course.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, until then, thanks again, Owen, and thanks everyone for listening.